All right, thank you for being here and welcome to our webinar, Principal Leadership in a Virtual Environment. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Paltz-Stevenson. I'm the Director of Educator Community Partnerships with Digital Promise. And with me today is Angela Hardy, who is a researcher at Digital Promise, and she will be moderating our panel discussion. But first, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Rochelle Herring, who's the Senior Program Officer in Education Leadership for the Wallace Foundation, to bring a few comments from the Wallace Foundation. Rochelle?
I'm so delighted to be here to introduce the webinar and this Digital Promise report called Principal Leadership in a Virtual Environment. At the Wallace Foundation, we deeply understand the value of school principals. For 2 decades, we've invested in research on education leadership to help strengthen policies, practices, as well as build community in the field. In the last several years, we've commissioned extensive research on what we call comprehensive aligned principal pipelines. They are comprehensive because they cover the span of activities needed to shape and support principals. These things include leader standards, selective hiring, preparation, and on-the-job support. And when they are aligned, they reinforce each other. Research tells us that pipelines result in effective school leaders, which in return has a great impact on student results. At the end of the day, student learning is what we're all about. During the pandemic, the principalship looks very different than it did before the pandemic. It's happening both virtually and in person, and principals need to ensure that kids learn whether they are in a school building or they're learning at a distance. And so we have to really start to think about what does the preparation for the principals need to be, because they've moved mountains over the past few months. And so along the way, we want to know, how can principal pipelines help us find, develop, and support a core of principals who are well prepared for this challenge, not just for today, but anything that comes at them in the future. This report from Digital Promise gives district leaders and decision makers very important recommendations to consider. These recommendations are aimed at helping principals provide high quality, equitable learning in a virtual environment, or what Digital Promise calls powerful learning. Pulling from research literature, interviews with 11 educators, including principals and administrators, the Digital Promise work, this report has synthesized all the lessons that they've learned and can help us think about how we shape learning for principals in the future. We know there's a lot more research that needs to be done because this is an emerging topic, but we're so excited to offer some early learning on how to support principals as they lead in a digital environment. Our webinar today will focus on the various domains, and we will hear from some extraordinary educators. I'm so excited to be here, and I know you're going to learn a lot from today's webinar. So back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Digital Promise. So at Digital Promise, our mission is to accelerate innovation in education to improve opportunities for all learners. And this means closing the digital learning gap, not only in access, but also in participation and powerful use. Digital Promise invests in the intersection of these stakeholder groups, educators, researchers, and developers, because we know that to realize technology's full potential, we have to focus on amplifying human capacity. To accomplish these goals, we believe in the power of networks, the sharing of stories from the field, support and investment in research, and engagement in lifelong learning. And in the next hour, as Rochelle introduced, we're going to present this new research report from Digital Promise that was commissioned by the Wallace Foundation. And in it, we set out to define what high quality, equitable learning looks like in a virtual environment and suggest how school district leaders can develop principals who can lead their schools to this type of learning. We developed the recommendations in this report by conducting 2 research activities. First, we reviewed the existing research on the intersection of school leadership, virtual learning, equity, and the 7 domains detailed in the principal pipeline. Second, we conducted interviews with leaders from 5 school districts. The report and the webinar highlight stories from school leaders about how they've considered how the virtual environment influences principal leadership. And research has shown us that it is not simply the same role in a new environment. The report also builds upon the research of the principal pipeline. Digital Promise explored what principal pipelines might include to support leaders working in virtual environments. The resulting report provides research-based considerations for how to build these comprehensive, aligned, equity-centered principal pipelines that prepare and support leaders to work in virtual contexts. Because this research is still emerging, we're bringing together what is known and applying it to a new area that's not explicitly in the research. Today is part 2 in a 2-part series. Yesterday in part 1, we discussed leader standards, pre-service principal preparation, and hiring and placement of principals. Today, we're going to discuss on-the-job evaluation and support, principal supervisors, and systems and sustainability. Both sessions are being recorded and will be posted to the Digital Promise website for your future viewing. So I want to begin a summary of the report with Digital Promise's principles of powerful learning. These principles are built upon decades of learning sciences research, and they guide educators in the design of learning experiences that engage the hearts and minds of learners. These are learning experiences that provide opportunities for students to really deeply engage in their learning while using technology in ways that contribute to closing the digital learning gap. Powerful learning means that learning is personal and accessible, authentic and challenging, collaborative and connected, and inquisitive and reflective. These sets of principles do not work in isolation, but are synergistic and mutually supportive. For the benefits of powerful learning to be realized, Digital Promise believes, based on a decade of experience and research with schools and school districts, that school leadership must take an active role in its definition, promotion, and maintenance. In the virtual context, we view powerful learning as the product of school leadership, inclusive access, and meaningful use. In the report, we represent this relationship as an equation. So starting here with the last factor on the screen, meaningful use describes how technology is used, not simply as a means to delivering supplementary materials, to whether that be to in-person or live instruction, but as a means to helping students achieve learning goals or to enable previously impossible interactions, really transformative use of education technology. Inclusive access closes the digital learning gap with reliable access in school and wherever else needed to the devices, the internet, and the supports that allow every student to meaningfully participate. And of course, technologies for powerful learning do not implement themselves. Effective leadership is essential. In the equation, we use the multiplication symbol deliberately to make it clear that if any of the 3 factors is 0, the chance for powerful learning with technology is also likely to be 0. In our research on the school leadership factor in the equation, we considered 3 key questions regarding what is involved with developing principals who have the skills and expertise to lead in a virtual context. We asked, what does a principal need to know and be able to do to effectively lead in a virtual context? And we found that principals need specific skills and expertise, including but not limited to those related to data privacy and security, selecting digital resources, community engagement in a virtual environment, and systems thinking with a new level of agility. They bring an equity lens to all of their decisions and actions. We then asked, what on-the-job supports do these principals need? And we found that they need support for innovation and risk-taking, and that collaboration with other principals is really valued in those supports, such as through online peer support or PLCs. Lastly, we asked, what conditions promote the development of a large cohort of principals who are effective leaders in a virtual context? And we found that key enabling conditions include having district leaders who are visible in the virtual environment, professional development curricula that's rigorous and responsive to the ever-changing needs of virtual learning, and hiring practices that offer authentic opportunities to demonstrate skills in virtual leadership. We then turned our attention to the domains of the principal pipeline. And for that discussion, I'll pass the mic to Angela, who will introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm thrilled to introduce our 4 panelists today. presented here in no particular order. First, we have John Seiler, who is a research associate on the Learning Sciences research team here at Digital Promise, where he uses his knowledge of various software tools to design innovative data collection, analysis, and reporting techniques. And he leverages his writing skills on various projects, reports, and literature reviews, including the Principal Leadership in a Virtual Environment report that we're discussing today. John's research focuses on emerging forms of teacher and principal professional development, and he is especially interested in how these new opportunities are influenced by technology and active learning. Also with us today, Dr. Courtney L. Teague is the Director of Professional Learning Content and Learner Experience with the Verizon Innovative Learning Schools Initiative here at Digital Promise. She collaborates across many school districts with multiple external partners and with Digital Promise to help craft a synchronized approach to define instructional strategy and instructional technology coaching, mentoring, professional learning, and efficiency. Prior to working at Digital Promise, she served as a technology training integration specialist, special education teacher, and a digital learning system administrator. She is also the author of How to Win Students and Inspire Them and The Uncommon Coach. With us today as well, we have Dr. Michael Nagler, who has held many positions in his 34 years in education. He began his career as a school teacher in New York City, then went on to earn his doctorate from Columbia University before he accepted an administrative position with Mineola in 1999. During his 20 plus years with Mineola School District, he has been a huge proponent of using technology to engage students in rigorous content and has been at the forefront of a number of national technology initiatives. Dr. Nagler was the 2020 New York State Superintendent of the Year and was a finalist for the 2020 National Superintendent for the Year. And then last but not least, with us we have Elaine Safe, who has over 3 decades of experience in education, with over 2 of those decades spent as an assistant principal or a principal. She is the retired principal of Panther Run Elementary School in Broward School District, Florida, the 6th largest district in the country, and has also served as the president of BPAA, Broward Principals and Assistant Principals. Elaine is the recipient of the BCPS 2017 Caliber Principal of the Year Award, the 2017 BEF Hall of Fame Award, and the 2017 Broward Alliance of Black School Educators Educational Leadership Award. She retired at the end of last school year from her position as a school administrator and now serves as president of Safe Consulting, Inc. Through her consulting work, she continues to work with Broward School District to build administrator capacity. Thank you, all of our panelists, for joining us here today. I'm going to jump in with our questions. So we'll start by discussing the 4th domain of the principal pipeline, on-the-job evaluation and support. And I'll kick it off with a question for Courtney. Courtney, when implementing virtual learning environments, which forms of support have been most helpful for new principals? Where do they still need more support?
Oh, wow, I get to go first. Well, in my work, I've seen that principals really benefit from on-the-job coaching. When we think about the principles of powerful learning, although we speak about them in the lens of students, powerful learning is still key to adult learners as well. And so with on-the-job coaching, it requires that the principals collaborate with one another. And so the reason I want to go into that route with on-the-job coaching is because it's super beneficial when the principals are receiving support from other individuals that can provide them with timely feedback. Because when we look at professional learning is not just defined by a session, but actually on the job learning. And we've seen that principals really benefit from having someone to come in and to support them, especially because after the pandemic, what we're experiencing is super new. And we don't know what we don't know, but having that on the job coaching is very key for principals. We also notice that principals are more than likely to raise a concern or an idea with someone that they're comfortable with. So having that point of contact is one thing that we've seen that has been super helpful with principals. Now, I think they do still need support in understanding their role and how they are going to be evaluated, because of course, this is no longer a traditional school setting, a traditional environment. So how are principals expected to behave when we're beginning to see that it's emerging, research is emerging, but it's not grounded in years of research. It's all new. So we're building the plane while we're flying it. And so some principals are unsure of their capacity. Am I doing what I need to do to the best of my ability? So I think that is where they really need additional support with understanding how they're being evaluated, what is expected of them, what makes them efficient, and just literally being able to identify a measure. And I know within the report, it states about having measures to help them identify their performance, but we have to have a common language for it. And so now we're still building that common language, and principals, I think they still need support. And that's just what I've heard thus far, being on the ground with principals across the US.
Thank you for that. I want to pass it now to Elaine to share what resources she's seen in Broward as supporting sustained professional learning for principals around best practices in leading virtual learning.
So in Broward, we transitioned almost overnight when the pandemic first hit from full face-to-face. We had a week to, first of all, get technology to all of our students. You have a mixed environment here in Broward because you go to homes where children have nothing to homes where children might have 3 or 4 devices. Broward was wonderful in providing a device for every single child. So it was a matter of getting that to every child. So we had to have days set up at each school. Some schools didn't have enough technology. So we reached out to our neighboring schools or our fellow peers and said, can we borrow some of your laptops? So we really had to get that in. Then you also dealt with a comfort level of your staff. Some teachers loved technology, used it all the time in class. Then you had the others that were terrified of it and now suddenly had to teach with it. And not only that, in Broward, we had to deal with some union issues, things like that about getting the technology in. So the coaching and mentoring piece that Courtney referred to was critical because you had brand new principals. We had one principal I actually was mentoring that had been appointed 2 weeks before the pandemic hit, and we shut down and went to virtual. So suddenly she was a new principal in a new role and in a completely new role that was new to all of us. So Broward, really to support each other, we had to look at the SEL of our students, our staffs, and the administrators themselves, because we were thrown into this environment. None of us, I'd been a principal 13 years when the pandemic hit, never experienced anything like this. You transitioned on a dime, and I had a comfort level with technology and still to encourage my staff to say, we still have to teach and provide an education. We still have to be there for you. So Broward set up monthly meetings of principals in cadres. So about 15, 16 principals, all at the elementary level or the middle level, mostly within the same area. So for example, I was in cadre 10. We would have monthly meetings to share our best practices. It was learning for some people, learning teams, and even the Microsoft Teams going from only seeing 4 people to eventually being able to see 90 people at a time. So a teacher could go from only seeing 4 students or whoever was making noise to the entire class. For us, a staff meeting to be completely virtual, because we literally went in for that week to get technology out, and then we were all out until administrators went back in May of that year, but the staff didn't come back till October of the following year. So we totally learned how to live in this environment. So there was a principals meetings, cadre meetings, a support system. You needed to account for the relationship piece because 95% of the job is relationships in face-to-face. In the virtual world, those became even more imperative. How to maintain the attention of your children who now had a device in front of them and were at home. And with all the things that go on in the home life or even in the teachers' lives. Some teachers didn't want their camera on because they may or may not want people to see what kind of a home they lived in, or didn't want things going on in their home. They could have had their own children who enrolled in school. So much happened in that time frame for administrators as well. Just being there and sharing, continuing to motivate each other as administrators, motivate our staffs, providing the curriculum. We had to get training. I mean, really, those teachers that weren't comfortable with technology or using the tools that were available, the software, we had to really enmesh them in that almost overnight. Over spring break, we offered training if they wanted to. Again, our hands were tied by we couldn't mandate it if they were off to try or attend, but they did. A lot did because teachers ultimately want to do what's best for their kids and provide. Equity, obviously, for everyone, providing networks access in some people's cases. Some people didn't have a home network. Broward was amazing with providing the technology and the access. And then as administrators, we kind of ran with it and how can I do what I do on a daily basis by building that. So we continue to coach and mentor our staffs, but also each other, because you wanted to feel like this can't just be me in this environment now. After a while, Broward transitioned to a hybrid where some parents who wanted their children to come face-to-face could come face-to-face, but the rest of the class was at home. So now you had teachers with maybe 10 kids sitting in front of them and another 10 at home, or even more. Or you had cases where someone came down with COVID or had to be home, and now you were trying to cover those. So it was just, the SEL piece became exceedingly critical in this time frame, and that coaching and mentoring piece, and just relying on your peers and say, we're all going through this. You know, if you have a great idea, share it with me so we don't have to invent it ourselves. It was a lot of that took place.
Thank you for that, Elaine. I want to open this up to Mike and to John to share any comments that you have on the job support, but then also to move the conversation into the evaluation piece, because these do go hand in hand. So I'll let either of you come off mute. It looks like Mike.
Yeah, I'll jump in. It's interesting because it really is different for everyone depending on their starting point. So I'm a much smaller district than Broward. We've been one-to-one for almost 10 years. There was no effort for my teachers or principals to shift to digital content, shift to, we use WebEx or Zoom or whatever platform you use. And it was more for us about not wasting a half year in May of 2020 and an entire year of 21, 22. And it wasn't an excuse. Eyes on the prize always. So, you know, we're adapting to a new methodology, but that doesn't mean we get to take a year off. So with that lens, you know, my principals, we're very clear on our vision in the district and what we hold important for kids and the experiences that kids have. And I give them a lot of autonomy to work toward that vision. And in that autonomy is whatever supports they need from me at central office to make it happen. And a traditional evaluation that we've used for years really is not a good method to evaluate the work in trying times. So we distilled down to very succinct, what do we want to accomplish? You know, we want eyes on kids. We want to make sure we can see them. We want to make sure they're doing well, know what their situation is home, refer them to the proper people if we have any suspicions that something is not right at home. And we didn't want to use virtual learning as an excuse not to have a high standard of work. And I leave it to my professional administrators to make that happen. So in that, it was the evaluation at the end of the year was really a conversation of how do you think we did? And each one was different in their answer, but some brought data to tell me the attendance rate, some brought data to show me how many kids were logged on at what time, and different assessments of student work that we were able to compile in our systems. Others pointed to different assessments because we still gave our not standardized tests. We still give an assessment, a digital assessment, to see where kids were benchmarked. So the evaluation piece for me had to be different than the traditional methods we used, but at the same time be flexible to account for the crazy times we were living in. And I think the biggest thing we could do for our principals is give them support. Is constantly, what do you need? What do we need? What do you need to help do the job that our community expects from us? And I think we did very well over that time. All different, in different points in times, it was different challenges, but overall, I think we did very well with it.
Thank you for that, Mike. John, I wanna come to you with a question around what you saw in the research about ensuring that principals who might lead more challenging school environments than others are not unfairly disadvantaged in an evaluation process of their leadership of virtual learning.
Definitely. And you can understand how evaluation and accountability can be scary words for a beginning principal in a working in a climate and an environment that nobody has seen before. And it's important in that context for a new principal to understand that the accountability is still there, just like Michael was talking about earlier. Expect that accountability to be there, but also expect that accountability to be shared. In the literature and in our interviews, we heard that principals really appreciated opportunities where they could sit down with their supervisor, with their administrator, and kind of align their efforts with the leadership standards that they understood that were in place for their district, as well as any goals that they as a district shared, and talked about ways to align those goals and standards with concrete actions that those principals could take and point to when it came to evaluation time and say, hey, this is what I did, this is what we did as a building, as a district to advance those goals and advance those leadership standards. And just being able to link those standards to concrete actions that the principals could take and work towards every semester, every day, really made a difference as to how much ownership they felt over their evaluation process and how accountable they felt to that shared mission.
Thank you, John. I want to move us into the next domain, domain 5 of principal supervisors. Since we're already talking a bit about principal supervisors and their role in supporting principals, not only in evaluation and on the job support, but also in creating a climate in which principals can thrive. And so I'll pose this question and open it up for any of you who wish to respond. But how should principal supervisors in a virtual environment, how should they go about conducting virtual visits to see what's happening in learning in classrooms? It's a different world than wandering down the halls and peeking into different rooms. What should that look like? And are there effective strategies that you found for understanding the challenges of a principal supervisor being engaged on the ground and what's happening in learning?
So we had it set up. Fortunately, I worked in a great school. The culture I had, the relationships I had with my staff, my teachers would welcome me in either in the real world, face-to-face or virtually. I love being with the kids and the staff. And when they set up their teams classes, every single one of them gave me access as almost a co-teacher where I could enter a classroom at any time. And they were comfortable enough for me to share this with my supervisor. In this case, is a cadre director. So we would set up times. He never came in unannounced. I would pop in all the time, just even to say good morning, sometimes to work with a small group. I think sometimes even to teach or cover a class. I think our teachers needed to feel that myself and my assistant principal knew what they were living in this world, and they needed to see us try it. So they welcomed us visiting their rooms. So they had no problem with me inviting the director, the cadre director, to come in as well. So he would visit. At first, it was almost once a month. And then unfortunately, we ran into as a whole district, there were union issues and things. So we were told they couldn't visit anymore till we returned to a more normal, but I could enter anytime I wanted. But he would log in via Teams. I would send him the link to the teacher's class, and we would announce when we were there. So either in the chat, we would type, hi, I'm here, it's safe, and my supervisor, or they would see my camera on as well. But I think for them to understand what we were dealing with the children, and they would give helpful tips. Sometimes they would say that teacher's background is a little distracting, perhaps if they reposition themselves here, or are they accounting for the child that seemed to be looking down and not paying attention, or does that child that kept losing their signal need assistance, things like that. So the cadre director and the principal supervisor got to see what it was like in the classroom and some of the challenges we were dealing with. Sometimes we'd learn, even for the child and the family, we had to reach out and explain to them, you might think you're off camera, but the child's in front of a mirror. So everything that's happening here, we can all see on the mirror, and the teacher would have, real quick, tell the child to turn their camera off, or if things were happening. So we learned as we went, and it was very important for that cadre supervisor to visit and see what we were living with, not just as administrators, but as teachers, to get a feel for how we were maintaining relationships, but also encouraging it all still goes back to SEL. Everybody kind of needed to maintain their stress levels. I was in a great school where they really cared and wanted to do it. I've never seen people work so hard or look so exhausted than teaching in the virtual or the hybrid environment. And we all learned a lot about how to handle our kids in that respect and include them and make them really still feel interconnected as teachers and students and with each other. Especially when the new year started last year and they'd never met in person, to bring those children together and make them feel like a family the way a class does and a staff needs to feel. So the cadre director coming in and visiting as much as he could, I felt was very important. I encouraged once a month as much as I could.
I would like to follow up. When you think about principal supervisors, I think about the intent of a visit. Even if we were in the traditional setting, you would announce that you were coming. And I think in the space, a principal supervisor should lead with grace and empathy and understand that we are being placed into other people's homes, especially in the virtual setting, and everyone's background is super different. But as a principal supervisor, coming into that space, you come in with the intent to learn and not to give feedback through the lens of what you're doing wrong, but being in there to see what is happening and actually being somewhat similar to the teachers of being the feet on the ground or the virtual ground per se in cyberspace. As a principal supervisor, you go in, you learn, but you also interact with the students. I know in various districts, the interaction may be limited based on union agreements, but if you're a principal supervisor, come in and engage. So now you're showing that you're in partnership with the teachers, and that also, going back to that SEL piece that Elaine mentioned, it shows that, hey, I'm in partnership with you and I'm here to learn and to help you, or support, not help, but support you with giving our students the best learning experiences possible. And if you're going to come in as a principal supervisor to visit a class, you should also have time on your schedule to provide insight so you can have communication or conversations with the classrooms that you visit. I understand that time is something that is super precious, but that also gives a teacher a sigh of relief to know that, hey, I'm not being observant. I don't know what I'm doing right or what I'm doing wrong. But it gives you, it puts you in the light of being a partner, because we're already under enough stress. Everyone's under stress. And anything that you can do to lift and lighten the burden would be greatly appreciated as a principal supervisor.
At the same end, I felt I needed to walk a mile in their shoes. So I don't know why I picked second grade, but I decided to teach a lesson to every second grader. Eye-opening to actually do the work, see the pitfalls, have a whole different understanding of what teachers are going through and what principals are going through. So I encourage, and my principals would do that quite often. They would cover classes, they would come in, maybe be a guest reader or do something where they were interacting with the class. I also think that the invention of breakout rooms totally changed the way we view teaching online, and the ability to group and get back to centers and some of the things we do in person. That was a big turning point for the quality of teaching that occurred online.
And yeah, I just wanted to follow up with another thing that came out of the research. And this was kind of, again, because this was such a new concept, this came more out of leadership research on leaders than research on the principalship. But one thing, and again, we hear SEL coming up again and again, but one thing that principals really appreciated when their supervisors modeled was just that continuous attention to personal relationships. We heard from one of our panelists yesterday that for about a month, teachers or principal supervisors met with their principals every day at the same time to just check in and level set and communicate with their principals, and they found that extremely helpful. And this sentiment is reflected in the research as well, just continuing to maintain that personal touch, that one-on-one time that you can expect to more reliably get perhaps in person, but continuing to make sure that those connections remain open during the transition to a virtual environment. And we found in the research that principals would kind of would pick up on that practice and do that with their teachers as well. And so the benefits of that attention extended all the way through, and really created a culture of, I think like Courtney mentioned, of partnership and of kind of a shared collaborative effort.
Thank you, John. I want to shift gears now and take us to our last domain that we'll discuss, which is domain 7, systems and sustainability. And I do want to acknowledge we aren't specifically calling out domain 6, leadership tracking systems, as a separate domain in this conversation today. But I would invite you, as you think about the role of systems and sustainability, to consider ideas of tracking and using data around future and current leader characteristics as you think about these questions. So I'll start us off by posing a question to Mike and then opening it up to anyone else. Mike, how are you in your district ensuring that principals, supervisors, principals, and other district leaders are aligned in their understanding of district needs, initiatives, and goals around virtual learning?
Yeah, I like to use the analogy of a bunch of ships at sea. And if we're all heading, each one has their own captain, and we're all heading in the right direction, they're all going to be leading their vessel a different way, but we're all heading toward a North Star that is the vision of what we want in our district. And I mentioned before that autonomy to me is incredibly important, because I'm not the principal. I did that many years ago. I don't want to do it again. I want the principal to run their building, and I want to support them in doing that. And the big codicil in that is every principal has to understand the vision. They have to understand their role in the organization and how to actuate the vision we want for kids. And we spell that out in our learning plan, and it's different at every level. So everyone has a different entry point that they're on that journey. And one of your panelists yesterday was my deputy superintendent. I think John was actually describing him about constant contact with the principals. He is their resource. He is the guy that has my ear, if a buffer, if you will, to make sure they get what they need, and that we're all on the same page in what we want for kids. Virtual learning to me is no different than in-person school. We want the outcomes have to be the same. We can't have an excuse of, like learning loss drives me crazy. I don't like that term. I think it's, what were you doing? Everyone was in the same boat. We were working towards educating kids. They were doing things. The success rate of it is going to be different in different places, but the work happened. Teachers were working very hard with learners to move the needle, to take them from where they started to a new place. And we started to celebrate that, and we need to continue to celebrate that. And the collective vision of a district has to celebrate that work. And the community has to be proud of the work we're doing in benefit of the kids. So I get very passionate about this, because I think without a system, you're a bunch of ships going in every direction. Is it a system of schools or schools of a system? And as leaders, we have to take credit. We have to take ownership of how we want to send that message.
Oh, wow. Michael, I'm sorry, Angela. What you just shared, Michael, was super key when you said about systems in the ship. And when I think of a ship, I think of a compass, and your compass is driven by your vision. And one thing that I would like for school districts and leaders to do is to plan your celebrations and celebrate those milestones and honor and acknowledge growth. When you're moving the needle, you're monitoring growth, and you should acknowledge it. in regards to what I've seen, Angela, and just being out and virtually out and about in schools. I've seen that leaders have become more intentional about acknowledging the growth of the students as well as the teachers, but public acknowledgement is something that I think we need to do more of in regards to getting community members and other think tanks involved in the works that are being done.
Thank you for that. I'm going to build off of the original question because I know that it's not just around making sure that everyone is aligned to a static goal. As Courtney and Mike both mentioned, it's about growth and heading toward that North Star. And as you grow, that North Star may shift and change. And we know that the needs of students in virtual learning evolves and the technology itself evolves. It's always changing. So I want to open this up. Maybe I'll have John kick it off because he has the research perspective, but then open for everyone. What are the mechanisms that need to be in place for updating the components of the principal pipeline as all of this continues to change?
Definitely. Yeah, when we thought about the maintenance of the principal pipeline, the maintenance of the track by which someone assumes a principalship and continues their development in that position, we envisioned that that track would be informed by, again, that first domain, that those leader standards, with the understanding that those leader standards will continue to evolve and emerge as the priorities and needs of districts change. What we would like to encourage is that as those, as you know, at the end of every year or at the beginning of every year, when those leadership standards are looked at and evaluated, that we have seats at the table for people who are on the ground, you know, people who are doing the work, our teachers, our principals, but also our community members, making sure that their priorities, what they would like to see, what the qualities that they would like to see in their school leaders, making sure that those qualities are also reflected in the leadership standards. So sort of this ongoing conversation from stakeholders, be they at the school level or the community level, being translated into leadership standards, being translated into the mechanisms of the pipeline, what we want to see happen as principals assume their position and continue their development in that position. So I guess that when we're talking about mechanisms in place for updating the principal pipeline, I would say that leadership standards and the development of those leadership standards should be front and center there.
Thank you for that.
I would include with that, Angela, that part of sustainability, systems and sustainability, is cultivating the next wave of administrators. So as the leadership standards change, your system has to have a mechanism built in to look to the future of when people retire, when people move on. You know, how did they replace Elaine? You know, she retired recently. I had one of the things of the pandemic is we had a lot of retirements of people that we didn't expect would all happen so quickly. So right now, and I know in my county, we have a lot of new people that are in positions that may or may not be ready for the position they're in. So that was also a function that we saw very recently. But I think the system, the school district has to own the accountability of creating the next generation of leaders.
Thank you. I want to close out this section on systems and sustainability by giving each of you a chance to maybe in 30 seconds or less, share what you think is the most important things to keep in mind when taking an equity lens in updating pipeline systems to attend to virtual learning. And I'll give you a moment to collect your thoughts, and then you can start in whatever order you're comfortable.
When I think, if I'm understanding correctly, there's a quote by Curtis Linton, and he said, unless every one of us commits ourselves to pursuing equity for each and every student, no institution can overcome our individual deficiencies. So I think it will take commitment from everyone involved.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Also, access, being able, one of the things that made our program successful in Broward was that the district provided that access and provided technology for every single student for one-on-one. I was nowhere near one-on-one prior to this and was able to get that and then updated. So it wasn't, and if one broke, either purposely through some act or accidentally, we were able to replace it to keep that child online. If they lost the technology, they couldn't attend school. So that was key. Same thing with a teacher and administrator. If their technology went down, they couldn't continue to participate. So equity has to be there. It has to be the access to the device, but also looking at the home situation, looking at the environment they're in, if they're virtual or if they're in a hybrid environment even, what can we do to make it better? So if a parent has to go to work and the child for some reason can't come to school because of a medical reason, or because it's a full virtual environment, how can we attend to care for that child so the parent can work and the child can still attend school? Or even companies or partnerships, how can they help provide? Maybe the child could go with the mother and sit somewhere and be online, or the father. We have to attend to those needs so children can come. And the vision that Michael referred to earlier, that went from the principals down to the teachers as well. They all drive their own ship and do it differently, but we all go to that same place. And we have to make them feel comfortable and provide those supports and provide everything they need within our own buildings and our own virtual worlds so that they can succeed. Equity is key to all of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add to Elaine the high quality broadband for every kid. You know, it's not enough giving the device. They need the ability to stream and to access the information that's ubiquitous. And the other two things is, you know, we live the world of asynchronous learning, and now it's waning, it's coming to a close. What did we learn? What were the good things about that? How could we leverage asynchronous learning to bring equity to places that doesn't have the same opportunities as other places? And it doesn't have to be our neighbors. It could be anywhere in the country. And lastly, I would put the idea in everyone's head that don't do pilots. Pilots unto themselves are, some children get it and others don't. So even good intentioned pilots is inequitable. So if you're going to do something, it should be grade-wide and or district-wide, school-wide, but that initiative has to be thought out where one group's not getting an advantage over another.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, what emerged in the research, and again, in our exploratory research on this topic, was that technology and the shift to a virtual environment, a virtual medium through which participation in kind of the entire apparatus of schooling could afford a lot of opportunities to advance district's goals around equity. You know, one very obvious example is meetings with teachers, whereas before, you know, pre-pandemic, we saw those meetings take place in person on schedules that perhaps not all families were amenable to, or not all families were able to commit to. We saw these meetings move online to a town hall format, using mediums like social media that families were already connected to. Now, that's not to say that these technologies were enough necessarily to ensure equitable access. We heard, I think, almost everybody talk about issues of equity of access. That's certainly a major barrier that needs to be overcome, but also equity of access to not only like the hardware and the connectivity that students need, but also the resources for the students to make the most of that. Who is there to help them with technical support? Who's there when something, you know, breaks or goes wrong? Who's there to answer maybe fundamental questions about the operation of their machine when we're talking about, you know, younger students who are coming online? In order for that technology to be used equitably, we're going to need to ensure that the supports are there for them as well. So I guess this is definitely an opportunity that presents a lot of promise, but definitely something that we're still going to have to be very attentive to make sure that potential is realized.
Thank you. I want to move us to opening this up to questions that panelists may have to pose to one another, that the audience may have. You can either, if you're an audience member, put a question in the Q&A or in the chat, or potentially a question that Rochelle might have. So I'll let it open up the floor for other questions.
So I do have a question. If you could do one thing now or one thing next, what would it be?
I think we need to save some of the best practices we learned from this. Being able to attend whole group principal meetings, cadre meetings virtually. My school was almost an hour drive. Broward's a large county, so almost an hour drive from the central office we would have to go to for meetings, depending on rain or traffic. It could take a good while to get there. Being able to just log in from my office and not leave my school site was amazingly helpful. We also, you could take that down to the school level with child study or the RTI process. Sometimes teachers, when they had a sub go to their room, they'd wander, they'd stop and visit the restroom, they'd chat with their friend, they wouldn't get to the meeting in as prompt a manner as logging in virtually. So keeping those processes and some of the best practices we learned from the virtual environment. Parent evening events, our parent attendance rate and family involvement rate went hugely to our virtual events because people could attend in their car driving home. They could attend from work. They could attend from their wherever they were with their family, as opposed to having to physically come to our site. So having that in some sort of hybrid format as well, it just opened the world up. So finding those best practices we could keep as we return to, we can't go back to what we were. You just can't go back. We're not the same. And we have to find a way to meld the two and make them work and make everything even better.
I would redefine engagement. I would keep how we've redefined it. And I know a few of y'all mentioned that cameras may be on or off while teachers are teaching, and that just because a camera is on doesn't mean that that person, whether a teacher or student or principal, is engaged. So I would want to redefine what we say engagement means across all roles and allow that to be allow it to just be like, hey, engagement is defined differently. Is no longer a checklist item of, hey, this person is looking at me, they're engaged. No, engagement looks differently.
Yeah, we're really launching to big ideas. We're taking, it's really been the impetus to launch a new model of high school that we're currently working on, that we're doing PBL around the CASEL competencies, and we're taking subjects and blending them so we can use technology to pull out our requirements for individual subjects while still do project-based things. And a lot of it's going to be asynchronous and leveraging the ability to see people virtually, to do some internships and to do some different thinking around the future of work and life after high school. So I think it's an exciting time that it's not a foreign concept to people because they lived it and it was a ubiquitous living it, everybody lived it. So it's incumbent upon us to leverage that and seize the moment to do something different.
I think for me, if I could just flip a switch and change one thing, it would be to reframe kind of the reframe it and publicize basically all the innovations and successes that we've seen over the past 2 years now. So often it's been the discourse surrounding the pandemic and the shift to virtual environment is what has been successful, what's been unsuccessful. Very binary, kind of black and white dichotomy there. Whereas I think it could be reframed into these are the innovations we've seen. Innovation is obviously something that we as kind of a broader society really value and we really like to see. And that's what we saw. We saw people making the most of what they could given no time limited budget. I think that's pretty much the kind of the defining characteristics of an innovation. And I think that if we could reframe the stories that we've seen over the past 2 years as innovations, that would I think that would work wonders in terms of, you know, making sure that our professionals are getting the credit and the recognition that they deserve, that they've earned, frankly, over the past 2 years.
Well, as our time is concluding here today, I think that's a wonderful note to end on, John. And I just want to thank everyone who attended today. Thank you, especially to our panelists for contributing all of these wonderful examples that really build upon the work that we did in the research report. And thank you to the Wallace Foundation as well for your partnership in the development of the report. The report is now available on the Wallace Foundation website. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. We will be posting, as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be posting the report along with both part 1 and this part 2 of this webinar series on the Digital Promise website, and we will share that information with you as soon as we have it. So again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day and a safe and happy holiday.
Thank you, everyone.